We've got some really exciting things to talk about. We are living in the time that is spoken of here in Daniel 11 and 12, called the time of the end. The time of the end began in 1917. 1917 was the time when the king of the south, that is, the power that occupied Egypt, pushed out of the Holy Land, out of the city of Jerusalem, the northern power, which is the power occupying Constantinople down through history. King of the north was pushed out of the Holy Land, and the opportunity was created for this time of the end when everything relates to Israel returning to their land, and the opportunity to retake Jerusalem, to set everything up ready for what will be the Battle of Armageddon and the destruction of the king of the north on the mountains of Israel. That's the end of chapter 11. The resurrection time and the time of the setting up of the kingdom of God. So we're in this crucial time, this last period. And Jesus said to his own disciples, many people wanted to see the days that you see and haven't seen them, so rejoice in the days that you've got. Well, many people wanted to see the days in the time of the end, and we're seeing them, so we rejoice in these wonderful days. And we can see many, many signs and many things fulfilled. We'll be going into some detail about these times, and this will be recorded. Certainly I've got it recorded, and you can get hold of the slides to go over the details if you'd like to later on. So we'll pass through some things fairly quickly and make a few assumptions, and if you'd like to know more detail, ask me later, or look at some of the videos we've got on YouTube. Now, the Lord Jesus Christ says, be ready, Matthew chapter 24, which is one of the records of the Olivet prophecy that Jesus gave, recorded in Matthew, Mark and Luke. And he said to his disciples, be ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. However, we do know the signs, and we can be very specific about some of the times. We can't tell the exact day or hour that the Lord will come. It could be any time now, because we're going to show that all the major prophecies of time periods have actually passed. And we're now in this very end time. So we'll have a look at how some of these things have actually passed into history. As recently as the 7th of October last year, the final time period which has been given for us to look at actually was fulfilled. And now we're in the time which is called, in verse 13 of Daniel 12, we just read the last verse, the time called the end of the days. In the Old Testament it's called the end of the days. In the New Testament Jesus calls it the end of the world. And the word end in both cases is a word which means the very end. The last cutting off end. You know, you can talk about an end of a sleeve down here maybe, but the cut off is right there, the very end. And that's the time that we're in now, the end of the days, or Jesus calls it the end of the world. When Jesus talks about the end of the world in the couple of parables he spoke of, and he doesn't use the term very often, but one of them is the parable of the tares, and he says, when the harvest is taken up, the angels go forth and separate the wheat from the tares. Then he told the parable of the fishing net, and he says, when all the net's drawn in, you can't sort of separate them until the net's drawn in, then the angels will come and separate the good fish from the bad fish. So it's the time when the angels are sent forth, is the end of the world. We know it's the angels who come to gather us to the resurrection and to the judgment. So that's the time we're in. That's it. Here we are. Let's have a look at it from the scriptures. So it's a time of trouble where we anticipate the unexpected. Expect amazing things that the world has never seen before. Expect some things to come like a bolt from the blue. That's what will happen in these very last times. A time of trouble such as never was. Luke chapter 21 also part of that Olivet prophecy. Distress of nations with perplexity, anxiety, stress, trouble for the world like it's never seen before. Well, here's an example of that. Okay, here's an example where everybody now sees everything that's happening in the world as it happens. It's incredible, isn't it? You know, knowledge will be increased at Daniel, well, in many different ways. Increased, and instantly we get to our phones, our TVs or whatever, all the news comes straight away. And we knew, and some of us were watching when it actually happened, the moment the shot rang out. And Trump says he was saved by God. And it's obvious, true. He was. For what purpose? Well, he said to save America or to save the world, he doesn't know. But certainly God had a plan that he was going to last longer. And there are some reasons that we can think of, which I'll talk about in a moment, why he would still be there. But is he going to keep on lasting? I mean, there have been more assassination attempts. And very recently. Well, but in any case, here is a man who was described as a result of this iconic moment as a lion. And we know that the merchants of Tarshish and the young lions are representative by those English-speaking peoples that have been populated by Britain and no doubt America and Australia and New Zealand and other countries in the Commonwealth are part of the young lions. And they are those who are supportive of Israel in the last days. And Trump has been very supportive of Israel, as we know. The point being made here in relation to assassinations, which we're going to talk a little bit about briefly, is that the Olivet prophecy, Jesus says, the signs of his coming are going to be including great signs in the heavens. Now, the political heavens, we know. Political heavens, the sun, moon and stars are mentioned, that they will fall from heaven. In other words, there will be instability amongst the ruling powers. Unpredictable events happening amongst the rulers. And Trump, of course, this particular situation, he was saved. But there are many other occasions where assassinations have actually taken place, or there have been attempted assassinations, or quick removals of people from power. That's all signs of the last days, instability. And this report that was written on the day of the assassination says that Donald Trump became the latest major political figure worldwide to face an assassination attempt in an incident that experts say may reflect a broader global pattern of increasing threats of violence against politicians. We seem to be seeing that assassinations are on the rise right now. Well, that's true, and certainly in terms of Trump, there was another case yesterday reported where a man has been charged over a plot from Iran to assassinate him. And the question is, will he survive the full term? We don't know that. What's God got in store for him? Well, certainly it appears that the early part of his presidency will be fine, and lots of things that he's got planned will come to pass, and many things that will benefit Israel will take place. But Iran, apparently, reading this article in detail, were prepared to put up hundreds of thousands of dollars to individuals who can actually assassinate President Trump or others in the potential ruling hierarchy in America. Iran is prepared to put up, they said, unlimited funds to achieve their goals to destabilise the United States. Okay, we're going to talk briefly about Russia. Trump might have some effect on what happens with Russia. Russia is on the road to ruin, and Armageddon is not far away, and Russia will lead the nations into Israel to precipitate that war. Verse 45 of chapter 11, he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. This is the great power from the north, with other countries coming with them, as mentioned there in those verses we read. But he plants the tabernacle between the seas in the glorious holy mountain, which is Israel, which is Jerusalem. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. And then some details about times leading up to that are given to us in chapter 12. Well, that was Israel. Brother Thomas, way back, saw all these things very clearly. He couldn't see them event by event exactly, but he saw everything very clearly, and he certainly saw the big picture and gave it to us in a lot of detail, and that was Israel, and we certainly continue to follow his outline. We remember the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and the fact that President Putin, the Vladimir of today, has as his hero Vladimir the Great, who commenced the great Rus, the Russian Empire, in Kiev, which is of course the capital of Ukraine now, way back in 1015, converted all of his people to Orthodox Christianity, and commenced the great Russian story And Putin wants to restore and get back to those original territories, and of course that will lead to a greater control over the rest of Europe as well. He wants to restore Russia to its greatness. He's apparently had some difficulties along the way, but really hasn't poured all his force or power into this battle at this point in time. Way back at the beginning, everybody knew that Ukraine certainly can't defeat Russia. What's going to happen there? Well, as we know, Brother Thomas said, all you Christadelphians out there, keep an eye on what's going to happen when Russia starts its grand move. Quoting from it was Israel. When Russia makes its grand move, and he's talking about a chess move, you know, the grand masters of chess making the grand move that really seals the fate of the opponents in the game of chess, and everything ends up checkmate from following the grand move that leads to victory. Well, when will Mr. Putin make his grand move? Have a look at where he's looking there in that photo. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, where he's looking? He's looking straight down over the map towards the Middle East. And the question is, when will he make that grand move? He's on the way. He's on the way. He's already got plans in place. There's no question about that, for Russia to become the dominant power in the world. Just recently, a few weeks ago, only a couple of weeks ago actually, in Russia, there was a conference of the BRICS countries, which are a group of countries associated with Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. They met, and there are other countries in that group as well. And at that time, Mr. Putin gave a press conference saying, I think that the time has come for Russia to mediate between Iran and Israel. He said, after all, we've got good relationships with both countries. We've got ideas about how this peace can be brought about, and it's time for us to step in. Well, that's what he's going to do. He's a king of fierce countenance, says Daniel chapter 8. And at times, he looks on people with that fierce look. And he understands dark sentences, which really means he understands human nature. He understands how people will react when he makes a certain move in a certain direction, or says something in a particular way, or prods another power in a particular way. He knows what the response will be. He's a good reader of responses in human nature. And so he understands exactly what he should do to make certain moves to provoke certain responses. Let me say, he understands Donald Trump. He's had a lot of time to work him out. And he knows what will trigger a response from Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is a very proud man, as everybody knows, a huge ego. And I think Mr. Putin knows if you stoke it the right way, you'll get the right response. And highly likely that he will stoke Mr. Trump in a particular direction. The Daniel chapter 8 says of that same power, the king of the north, that by peace he will destroy many. He will promote peace with an ulterior motive of, at the time when everybody starts to drop their guard and say everything's fine, of making the grand move. So he's been waiting in the wings while America has tried to work out something between Israel and Iran, totally unsuccessfully. There have been at least 12 trips by the Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, going over to the Middle East to try and bring about some sort of peace arrangement. Every one of them has failed spectacularly, and Mr. Putin is ready to throw his hat in the ring to bring them to the table. And likely, Mr. Trump might well say, we don't know this for sure, but he might well say, yes, you probably are in a good position, why don't you go for go? Because he likes to think he's pretty friendly with Mr. Putin. Well, Mr. Putin would gain a very prestigious situation as a result of that, wouldn't he? He'd look really good if he could bring about something. He wouldn't be a pariah as far as the West is concerned, he is at the moment, but he'd become the peacemaker. By peace he destroys many, the doyen of international diplomacy, and everybody would bow before him, really. And eventually all of Europe will swoon and come under his spell. Well, that's what's laid out when the king of the north is described, and Daniel chapter 8 gives us quite an interesting description. Now, in terms of the Middle East, the 7th of October last year, was the commencement of a great change in the world. The world will no longer be the same. The influence of what happened over there has spread worldwide, created instability, created anti-Semitism, created trouble in the streets of most capital cities of the world. And everything's changed. And people haven't really known, politicians, certainly in Australia, but in most countries of the world, haven't known how to handle it, haven't known how to deal with it. And Zechariah chapter 12 says, I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. Now you can see the Dome of the Rock there in the middle of the that Holy Mount area, called the Temple Mount, or the Arabs call it the Al-Aqsa area. The mosque is there on one side and the Dome of the Rock in the middle. And this Temple Mount, or Al-Haram al-Sharif for the Arab's name, has become the focus of all the trouble in the Middle East. It's really what it's all about. So even though the invasion was in from Gaza, was in the southern area of Israel, the operation, the Arabs called it, Hamas called it, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. We're going to flood the mountain Al-Aqsa. We're going to take control and not allow Israel to encroach any more upon that holy place. And let's gain it for ourselves. That's the whole purpose of it. And they don't want Israel to have control of the Temple Mount in any way. That's the great battle. So that Dome of the Rock is the centre of much of Daniel's prophecy. And also Jesus mentions that area, the Temple Mount area, in the Olivet prophecy. It's called the abomination that maketh desolate upon that place. The abomination that maketh desolate was set up in 688 AD. Now that's a key date for prophecies. 688 AD was the day, the year that the foundation was laid, and no more Jews could worship on that temple site. That's the time, from 688 right till today. Jews are not supposed to be allowed to worship there, but it started to change in about the last 45 years, 46 years, since 1978. 1978, another crucial date we'll talk about in a moment. So this is all changing in accordance with Daniel chapter 12. Daniel 12 tells us that these things will happen just before Jesus returns. So these key things are about the place of worship. Now that Dome of the Rock was built right over the altar of Solomon's temple, right over the place where Abraham offered Isaac. It's the holy, holy place, the most holy. And it's been built there as an abomination. Now God calls the abomination that makes desolate anything that destroys or disrupts worship of him on the holy mountain that he's chosen for himself. Now the first abomination that maketh desolate that's mentioned in Daniel was when Antiochus Epiphanes went into the temple of worship in his day, in 167 BC, and he desecrated the holy place. He put an altar to Zeus there, a statue of Zeus, and he offered a pig on the altar, right in the most holy place. And that is called in Daniel the abomination that maketh desolate, because it's an abomination that desolates the holy place. Okay, so that only lasted 3 years, and the Maccabees drove him out. Jesus then said in the Olivet prophecy, there will be another abomination that maketh desolate in the holy place, and when that happens you flee to the mountains. Now that was AD 70 when the Romans came in and overthrew the holy place and burnt the temple. That was an abomination, so that people couldn't worship there again. Then after that, the Jews did worship there a little bit for a while, on and off, until 688 AD, when the Arabs said, no, we're going to build the Dome of the Rock there, and no Jews can worship there anymore. That's the last abomination that maketh desolate. That's going to be overthrown soon. Whether it's the earthquake or what it is that's going to overthrow that place, we know that will be gone. And then the temple and Jesus can rule from Jerusalem. So there's the three abominations that maketh desolate, all mentioned through Daniel the prophet, because Jesus said, when you see the abomination, whoso readeth Daniel, let him understand. That's what it's about. So it's not allowing faithful worship in that holy place. 688 AD. Now going back to President Trump for a little while, what did he do? He did a number of things for the Jewish people during his first presidency. And in particular, and this is a photograph of him with Prime Minister Netanyahu down at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, Trump's headquarters. And Netanyahu came and met with Trump for the first time in quite a while, and they had a big reconciliation there, and they talked about plans on the assumption that President Trump would be re-elected. And what did they talk about? Well, it was less than 2 weeks after the assassination attempt on Trump's ear, on his head, but got him on his ear. So they talked about assassinations. And Trump pointed out that when I was president, and I was working with you, because Netanyahu was Prime Minister at the time, we assassinated a number of people, and it resulted in quite a degree of peace as a result. They killed the head of ISIS, and that basically meant ISIS more or less disintegrated. They killed the great General Soleimani of Iran, and that put Iran back in terms of their military growth. And they also, the Israelis assassinated the head of the nuclear program for Iran. He was killed, and that put their nuclear program back as well. So I think Trump, no doubt, said, okay, if President Biden is going to cut back giving you arms, then use the arms you've got to take out the heads of your opponents, the leaders. Well, within 2 or 3 weeks after Netanyahu went back home, they'd taken out in Iran the head of Hamas. The head of Hezbollah went soon. Other leaders and military generals of the opponents were taken out. And as a result, yes, Israel made great progress. So they weren't just fighting house to house and so on in Gaza. They were actually going towards the leaders. And that disrupted everything dramatically. So the main topic of conversation over that table definitely was assassinations. And the other point that they talked about was how to get MBS to the table. Mohammed bin Salman, the leader of Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia figures largely in the future because when we read in Ezekiel 38 in particular, we read of the Arab countries supported by the merchants of Tarshish and all the young lions thereof supporting Israel at the time of the end. Saudi Arabia is in the regions of the Arab Peninsula, Sheba and Dedan. And he is, of course, the crown prince, the ruler. So there's a prophecy in Joel chapter 3, which we just have a turn to without going into any detail. Joel chapter 3, about what's happening now with Tyre and Sidon and all the coasts of Palestine. In Joel chapter 3 and verse 4, it's only a couple of pages from where we read, what have I to do with thee, O Tyre and Sidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Now this is a last days prophecy. Joel chapter 3 begins with the bringing of all nations to Jerusalem to battle. Verse 1 and 2, in those days, in that time, I bring the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem back again. I will gather all nations and bring them into the valley of Jehoshaphat and plead with them there for my heritage Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations and parted my land. I'm going to bring all nations. Now then, there's a few verses in between which talk about what's happening now in Gaza and Lebanon. Briefly overlook that in a moment. Then you come to verse 9, and we're preparing for Armageddon. Proclaim this among the Gentiles, prepare war, verse 9. Wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, let the weak say, I am strong. So, verses 1 and 2, preparations towards Armageddon. Verse 9, we're getting to Armageddon now. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men. In between time, we have to deal with what's happening in Tyre and Sidon, verse 4, and all the coasts of Palestine. Now, all the coasts of Palestine is Gaza and the West Bank. They're the coasts or the border areas. And Israel has to be in total occupation of those areas, according to Ezekiel chapter 38, before the king of the north comes down and says, what a lovely place. I'm going to take a spoil. I'm going to take a prey. I want to control that area. And so it will be a very prosperous and successful area. In the meantime, these people to the north of Israel, in Tyre and Zidon, and in Gaza and in the West Bank, they all have to be dealt with. So that there is a peaceful place in Israel. Whereas Ezekiel 38 tells us there's no walls, no bars, no gates, no trouble with the surrounding peoples. So verse 4 says, what are you doing? You're trying to render me a recompense. You're trying to punish me. Because when God says, when you touch my people, you're touching the apple of my eye. You're doing something to me, not just to my people, but to me. So he says, in the past, you people in those areas, you've sold my people off into slavery. Verse 6 says, the children of Judah and Jerusalem, you sold them to the Grecians. Now in Ezekiel's day, remember, Joel's day, those sort of times where we're talking about these prophecies being fulfilled, the countries around picked off pockets of Jews and kidnapped them and sold them off into slavery. There's a record of that in Ezekiel. And it was the Grecians, verse 6, that did the transporting of all the slave trade from Tyre. Ezekiel 27 talks about that. So the Jews were sold off into slavery at the behest of and by kidnapping by people in lower Lebanon area and the Philistine area, Palestine today. So God says, you've done that in the time past and you want to try and overcome them again. Well, that's not going to happen. God says in verse 7, I will raise them out of the place where you've sold them. And they've all been brought back into the land. There's something like 8 million Jews now, I think, in the land, of a total of 10 million population. They've all come back from their scattering. I'll bring them back, he says, and I will return your recompense, Tyre, Zidon and Palestine, Philistines. I'll return that upon your own head. And you're going to lose, and in verse 8, your sons and your daughters, I'll sell them into the hand of the children of Judah, the Jews, and they will sell them to the Sabaeans. So you're going to be sold off to a land afar off, it says. A people afar off, for the Lord hath spoken it. What's going to happen? Well, there on the map you can see in the north, Lebanon, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank. It's God's payback time. I'm going to render you a recompense. Pay you back, because you people are the same character, the same kind of people, doing the same kind of things as your forebears did hundreds of years ago, and it's not going to work. So you will be overcome. Without going into a lot of detail here, just look about the centre there, verse 7. I'll raise them out of the place whether you have sold them, sold is highlighted there, sold them into slavery. I'll return your recompense, and Israel will take control of the Palestinians and that southern area of Lebanon and work with the Sabaeans. Who were the Sabaeans that they're going to be sold to? Well, there they are, Saudi Arabia, all that area there. Sheba and Dedan. Now, the travelling companies of Dedanim are mentioned there in Isaiah 21. Historically, they're the nomadic Arab tribes. Okay, and the Sheba were the more settled Arab tribes, all in that Arabian Peninsula area, Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. They're called the Sabaeans. They were very wild people in time gone by. The Sabaeans fell upon the oxen and the asses of Job and slew all the servants. They were wild, wild people. But and they're still pretty wild people today, being descendants of Ishmael, the Arab peoples. But they're the people who are actually going to be supportive of Israel when the time comes. When the invader comes down from the north and in the kingdom, the Arabs and the Jews will be brought together again. But at the moment, they're the Sabaeans, the wild people. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, likely had this journalist killed in Istanbul, and he was famous for a little while. This journalist went into the embassy, Saudi embassy in Istanbul, and didn't ever come out except in pieces. He was sawn up, and somehow he got out. So MBS became known as Mr. Bonesaw. MBS for a while, he was well and truly on the outer, and he was shunned by many Western leaders as a result of that, but he's back. It doesn't take long for people to forget and to realise that if you really want to get things done in the world, you've got to be associated with the leaders who've got clout and who've got money. And Saudi Arabia's certainly got a lot of that. So MBS is back. Israel then, when the war is over with Hamas and with Hezbollah in the north in Lebanon and with the Houthis, however that comes to a conclusion, the result will not be a two-state solution. It will be that these Arab peoples are given good opportunities in the Arab states. Good opportunities to have a better life. You know, they won't be rebuilding Gaza, they won't be rebuilding southern Lebanon. It'll be another place, and they'll be given a lot of prosperity there, because after all, the Saudis have got big plans for development of their country, and they need people to be part of that. And so that's the future for them. It won't be a bad slavery, it'll be a slavery. In other words, they won't have any option. They'll go there, but they will have a better life. Well, there's Mr. Netanyahu at the United Nations not very long ago, 6 weeks or so ago, saying, there's the curse. The nations coloured in black, mainly Syria, Iraq and Iran, that almost look like the northern powers that are going to come down into Israel, aren't they? And on contrast, he said, we've got big plans. If we can make peace with Saudi Arabia, the red line through there represents, I suppose, a route for trade, which goes from the Indian Ocean right up into the Mediterranean Sea. It'll be fast rail, transport, oil and gas supplies, electronic conduits running all the way through, bypassing the choke points, which are the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and through Saudi Arabia and through Israel and into the Mediterranean. Big plans. It just needs Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states to come on side with the similarly to the Abraham Accords. And Saudi Arabia wants to do it, but they want to wait until after the terrorists have been dealt with. So soon after that visit to the United Nations, Israel again unleashed tremendous technology and amazing things that they could do in terms of their capacity to surprise people. The exploding pages, what an amazing thing that was. Well planned and well carried out. And eventually Hezbollah's leader, and they finally got Sinwar down in Gaza. So they've wiped out the leaders. And that's the political heavens that Jesus talked about. He said there'll be many signs amongst the leaders of the world. I don't think we've seen, from what we can see in the scripture, the end of the political disruptions and possibly more assassinations. Be ready for anything, brothers and sisters. Be ready for anything. Really, things will surprise in the next little while. Why are we still here? Brother Jim Cowie gave a talk on this not that long ago and offered different solutions, because saying we are in the very last times, there's no doubt about that. And we're looking for the resurrection when the trump of God raises the dead. Well, as I said, I think we're right in this final phase now, the very last time, and the very significant times that we're in, because they are the times which we'll see the angels come for us very soon. As we said, Jesus said that the end of the world, the angels come forth to take us. All the end of the world in the New Testament. The final phase is the resurrection, the time of reckoning or judgment, and of our reward. We trust in the grace and mercy of our God. The Lord returns, the resurrection, the gathering, and the time of reckoning. As we said, there are no more time periods given in Scripture, talking about specific time periods, as for example in Daniel, that are yet to come about before the Lord's return and the resurrection. None. You cannot find a time period. It's just not there. They've all actually happened. The time of the end has seen some of these time periods fulfilled within this last time. These are the important dates that come out of the book of Daniel to tell us that we're in the last time. The time of the end began in 1917 when the king of the south pushed the Turks out of Jerusalem. The Ottomans were pushed out. That's the end of 25-20 days. 25-20 days is 7 times in Daniel. Okay, and Nebuchadnezzar was told that you will be mad for 7 times. 7 times is 7 years, and a year in the Bible prophecy is 360 days, or 360 years. 7 times 360 is 2,520 years. That's the period of the kingdom of men, as far as Daniel is concerned. Daniel was given the understanding of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which was there'll be the kingdoms of Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece and Rome, and then the European dominions, and then will come the stone. That's the period of the kingdom of men. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar is told this period where the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he will, that's Daniel chapter 4, will last 7 times, 2,520 years. And that period commenced when Nebuchadnezzar started to rule, because that's the kingdom of men. He started to rule when Daniel said, as far as God was concerned, you are the head of gold. That was in 603 BC. You are the head of gold. 603, you can do the maths when you get home, or in your head now if you like, plus 2,520 comes to 1917. So that's one time period from Daniel fulfilled. We know the date, 1917. 1948, well, if we're back in Daniel chapter 12, we know that was the date of the commencement of the nation of Israel, and it's the end of a 1260-year period, which is called in Daniel chapter 8, verse 7, times and a half. That is 1 year, 360, times 2 years, it's 720, and then half a time, 180, gives you a total of 1260. We know 1260 appears a bit in the Bible. 1260. And what is at the end of? Well, in verse 7 we're told the time of scattering of the power of the holy people is finished. So Israel can no longer be scattered from 1948. So 1948 is a cutting off period for Bible prophecy. 1260 days. Well, what's the 1260 days from? If it ends in 1948, we're not told specifically there when it starts. But in the next verse, or 2, actually we're told a little bit further down in verse 11. In the next few verses we're told when it starts. It starts when the time the abomination that maketh desolate is set up. And as I explained before, the abomination that maketh desolate was set up in 688. Add from 688 1260 years, you come to 1948, the end of the scattering of the people of Israel. Then there's 2 more time periods given also from that time of the 688 abomination that makes desolate. There in verse 11 we're told there'll be a period of 1,290 days. So we've had 1260 days ended in 1948, 1290 days ends in 1978, when access is given to the Temple Mount. But in the meantime, wasn't there something major that happened that changed everything? It was the 6-Day War, wasn't it? The 6-Day War. How did the 6-Day War change everything? Israel got control of the Temple Mount, Jerusalem, in the 6-Day War. And Jerusalem was no longer trodden down of the Gentiles. We know that one well, don't we? From Luke chapter 21. Israel no longer trodden down of the Gentiles. What's that talking about? Well, the treading down was way back in Daniel again. When Daniel saw a vision of the ram and the he-goat running together and smashing into one another. It's when Alexander the Great overcame the Persians at the Battle of Issus. And then the he-goat trampled everything down underfoot. Stood on it, trampled everything down. That finished in 1967. When did it start? When that battle took place, the Battle of Issus, in 333 BC. And Daniel asked, how long will it be that this treading down happens? He's told 2,300 days, 2,300 years. And from 333 BC, 2,300 years, come to 1967. So aren't we in these critical times? Aren't we in amazing times, prophetically? So, 1948, Israel's got the land back. 1978, which we'll just talk about in a moment, 1290 days, is a big move that starts something happening. But before that could start, 1967, they had to get the Temple Mount back. Now, it's under Israel's sovereignty, but they're still allowing the Arabs to control access to it. But in 1978, the Camp David Accords happened. Now, Camp David, most of us were here then, I think we were all here then. Camp David, President Jimmy Carter called across to Israel President Sadat from Egypt and Prime Minister Begin from Israel, and he got them in his retreat at Camp David in different cabins, and he said, "You're not leaving here until you make a peace agreement." It actually happened. Now, what they did about Jerusalem was that President Sadat in September, that was in 1978, he actually wrote a letter to Menachem Begin via Jimmy Carter saying, "This is what's going to happen and what we'll agree to happen for the holy places." And amongst the items that he listed was an item which said everybody should get access to worship at all the holy places in Jerusalem. Now, a lot of the Muslims didn't agree with that, but he was the first and the most prominent Muslim who said that. First of all, meaning that the Jews could go to the Temple Mount to worship. Now, soon after that, he got assassinated because a lot of people didn't agree with that. But what does the prophecy say? Daniel chapter 12, we just read it. He said, "From the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination that maketh desolate set up," 688, that's the date that you couldn't worship there anymore if you were other than a Muslim, because the Dome of the Rock's being built, 688, there'll be 1,290 days, 1978. But what? Well, the next verse tells us, but what? "Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days, 1335. 45 years later. The start of it is 1978, when there's this agreement that it should happen, but you've got to wait and wait and wait. Another 45 years, 2023. And 2023 started the battle over who controls the Temple Mount. Al-Aqsa flood. It started. And we are blessed to see this. As I opened to say, Jesus said, "You're blessed to see my day, you disciples," because everybody wanted to see it, but they didn't. You're blessed to see it. This is telling us we're blessed to see 2023. And from 2023, we read, Daniel's told, "I'm not going to tell you about any more dates. Go your way and rest, because you will stand in your lot at the end of the days." So we are now in the end of the days. We've gone past that final date that was given in prophecy for us all. So we're now at the end of the world. The period of the time of the end has stretched out to the very end of the world. There it is, the abomination that makes desolate. 1260 years, this is Daniel 12 we just read. 1290 years, access for all peoples, but it hasn't actually worked itself out yet. But more and more Jews are going up to the Temple Mount now. Just recently, 2,000 went up, Jews on the Temple Mount in August this year, on a day when they remember the destruction of the temple. And so it's bigger and better, and they are praying, which theoretically they're not supposed to do. They were singing and dancing, which theoretically they're not supposed to do. But this is the time when Israel gets back that area and everything is ready towards Armageddon. So there's one other date that I should mention. You can see there the dates down the left-hand side and the fulfilment. 2022. Does everybody remember the beautiful Queen who reigned for 70 years? Queen Elizabeth. A prophecy in Isaiah 23 said, "In the last times there will be a ruler on the throne of Tarshish," ancient Tyre, which is now Tarshish in Britain today, for 70 years. And during that period of 70 years, the power of Tarshish will be forgotten. They will not be doing well in the world. But after she dies, after the end of the 70 years, they will return to their hire. Meaning to say, and it does say, they will go on and trade with all the nations of the world. So after 2022, Brexit having been accomplished, Britain is now starting to rise from the economic ashes. It'll take a little while yet, but that's a sign that there would be a 70-year reign. Never been one before on the throne of Britain or any other country significant for the Bible. 70 years, and then will come a time when Britain will rise again, and when they will bring their goods, says the last verse of Isaiah 23, to Israel, to the feet of the king. So another interesting date of prophecy. That's the only other time period that relates to these days, and it's gone. So we're in the very, very last time. Go thy way, Daniel, till the end of the days. So we're at this time called in the Old Testament end of the days, New Testament end of the world, end of the age, the aeon, the age, and the next period of time mentioned in the New Testament is the world to come, the age to come. So that's right where we are right now. The Olivet prophecy, the parallel is given there between Matthew, Mark and Luke, the questions. And in Matthew, the disciples asked particularly, what's the sign of the end of the world? Going towards the end of that prophecy, these are the signs. This is the last bit of the Olivet prophecy paralleled between Matthew, Mark and Luke. So Matthew says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun's darkened, the moon doesn't give a light, the stars fall from heaven. That's talking about rulers' instability, political troubles everywhere. And there have been, haven't there? There have been political troubles and lack of direction by the politicians for quite a while. You know, the only two that stand out at the moment are Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, aren't they? As well, and President Putin. Sorry. Yeah, as people who can make things happen. And how long Trump will be given to make things happen will be interesting. Surely, if he's in power for a certain part of his term at least, he will make a difference as far as the Middle East is concerned and bring that time of peace that we're expecting, where they dwell without walls, bars or gates. But nobody can tell. Expect the unexpected. Mark says the same. Sun, moon and stars won't give their light. Stars of heaven shall fall. That's rulers being assassinated or people being toppled in some way. Times of the Gentiles fulfilled, says Luke, in the sun, moon and stars. Luke is the only one who goes on to talk about what will happen in the earth, in the orange there. Distress of nations, perplexity, stress, sea and the waves roaring, protests in the streets of capital cities. We've seen all of that, haven't we? In a huge way since October the 7th last year. And men's hearts failing them for fear and looking after what's coming on the earth, because in all three, we're told, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. That's where we are. These are the times. So I think it's fair to ask, that tribulation that's ended is more or less Israel taking charge now. Netanyahu has not stopped. He's moving ahead to establish Israel as the major power with little threat from anybody nearby. And so that's that taking control. So the tribulation, as it were, for Israel, even after they got back into the land, is now about over. And they become, as Ezekiel 38 says, confident, dwelling confidently. And that began, I think, on the 7th of October, 2023. Now, God has given up on the world, brothers and sisters. He's given them up to uncleanness, as in the days of Romans, and we talked about this a bit this morning, when the Apostle Paul wrote, this was the state of the world. Terrible immorality, from the top all the way down. Paul says to the Romans, he says, God's given them up to uncleanness, to the lust of their own hearts, to dishonour their own bodies in sodomite behaviour all around the Roman world and all around today's world. It's dreadful. God's given them up to vile affections. In other words, God stepped back and said, if that's what you want, reap the consequences. And that's what's happening in our world. The world and all its institutions are coming crashing down around their ears. God's more or less saying, give them the rope, let them destroy themselves. The sun and moon darkened, the stars falling for heaven. But fortunately and blessings for us, we're promised the days will be shortened for us. So Daniel 11 says, Daniel 12, early verses, at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. Many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Let's be powerful examples, brothers and sisters, of those who are ready and waiting. The bridegroom is coming. 5 were wise, 5 were foolish. And Jesus says, he's just given the Olivet prophecy to his disciples, and he says, these are the sorts of parables that will have lessons for you. Be ready, have your lamps burning. Watch. You know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man cometh. That's true. But we are given all the signs. We've got them all. Our Lord is coming. Let's trim our lamps and be ready for him.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yes, yes. Well, if that's okay with Brother Ray, is that all right?
Right, Chairman? Yeah. Just a simple question. When you talk about Joel 3, you said in verse 5 and 6, that was in the past when they sold the children of Israel and the Greeks received them?
Yes.
What year was that?
Well, around the time, mainly, not exclusively, but around the time of the captivity. You remember that Edom was told in Obadiah, stop boasting against the people, don't stop rejoicing and being happy because my people have been taken into captivity, So in other words, when the land was, I suppose, lost to the enemy. Now it did happen over a period of time. I'm not sure that I can put my finger on the exact verse right at the moment, I should be able to.
That might even be that, but yeah.
In Ezekiel 27. In verse 13 of Ezekiel 27, you read in verse 12, Ezekiel 27, Tarshish was thy merchant, this is talking about Tyre, by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches with silver, iron, tin and lead, they traded in thy fairs. So the ships of Tarshish were going all the way from Tyre right out to Britain and trading. But with them, Javan is actually the name for Greece. Okay? Javan is actually Greece. The J is the Y of Ionia. Ionia. Javan is Greece. And Greece, Tarshish was actually a descendant of Javan. And they had all the ships of trade. Now there were slave traders who took many by ship. So the word Javan there is the same as the word Grecians in Joel chapter 3. Grecians, Javan, okay? So the Grecians, and Tubal and Meshach, now of course that's Siberia, okay? So some slaves were sold off into Siberia and some were taken by ships to Europe by Javan. So it says Javan, Tubal and Meshach, they were thy merchants, they traded the persons of men and vessels of brass in thy market. So when Joel says you sold them through the Grecians to lands far off, this is what it's talking about, that time. So when Ezekiel's writing, we know it's during the captivity. And this seems to be a fairly recent thing, These are all the things that you've been doing, Tyre. You're going to be destroyed. Recently you've sold my people off into slavery. Some went into captivity to Babylon. Others were sold as slaves beyond Russia by land or by sea, the Grecians, off to the far west. So the Jews were sold into slavery. God says, you, Tyre, you people were involved in selling my people off into slavery. I'm going to get you into the hands of Israel and they're going to sell you off in the other direction. Instead of the northwest through the Grecian ships, you're going to go by land down to the southeast into the area of Arabia. Now the Jews of course did fairly well once they went into slavery because they started up businesses in Europe. They did all right. And the Palestinian people, when they're taken over by the Saudis with unlimited money to give them jobs and work, and they'll do all right too. So there'll be blessings for Arabs and Jews in the kingdom.
Have you any idea on or thoughts on when Gog of the North comes down and goes through the land to Egypt? I mean, how long that period will last?
No, I don't know.
Can't you take
Can't-
a guess?
Look, it's a really interesting question. I don't think, it doesn't appear that they're very long down there. They're long enough to take control. Now, what are they taking control over in Egypt? Well, basically, it's the trade, the Suez Canal, more than anything else. There are a lot of treasures there, true. It says, they have power and control over the treasures of Egypt. Treasures are that there is wealth there is gas and oil there. It's really ain't being discovered. The trade, if that route doesn't go through Saudi Arabia in time, that Netanyahu showed, then the opening up of the Suez Canal again, when the Houthis are stopping bombing the ships going through there, again it's a central trade area. And remember, Napoleon wanted control of Egypt, and Hitler wanted control of Egypt. Because if you control Egypt, you control that whole Middle Eastern area economically, they say. So they get control of that, but something happens. Jesus returns. There's trouble out of the northeast. You can't work out what's going on. There's something happening in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know. Can I say a few years?
Yeah, okay.
When Antiochus Epiphanes had his attempt to come down into the area too, and he was going to take over Egypt, but that was when the Romans were in control, and the Romans said, out of here, we're going to take Egypt.
Well, they all wanted
and he
Egypt.
went back up into Israel and decimated Israel at that time too.
Alexander the Great too, same thing. Yeah.
I saw something on YouTube that was saying that Libya and Sudan meant that they were always sort of allies or connected with Egypt, and in that prophecy that was read, it said that Libya and Ethiopia would be on the
at his steps.
At the steps.
At his
yes.
steps. No doubt about that. Libya, the word simply is Phut, P-H-U-T, which is the ancient name for all of the top of Africa. Libya, Algeria, right across to Morocco, in fact, that whole area there, all north of the Sahara. Okay? And Ethiopia is Kush, which is all south of the Sahara. So we oughtn't to just limit it to Sudan. All those African countries. And who is courting the African countries more than anyone else right now?
Russia.
Russia. They've held two big conferences in Russia where all the African leaders have been invited, and Putin said, any debt you had for the Soviet Union for your development in time past, forgiven. All we want you to do is to buy all your weapons from us. We're happy to give you as many Kalashnikovs as you like. Now there's a reading in Chronicles we read just recently, I think it's Chronicles, not Kings, Chronicles, where the Ethiopians came against Israel with others. The Ethiopians supplied 1 million men back then. You imagine, you put out 10 million Kalashnikovs to those people in Africa, they're running like crazy up to be with Russia in the war. So they're going to be delighted to follow Russia, Ethiopia and Libya as well. Libya as a country is more or less controlled by Russia now.
The Wagner Group had a big say in destabilising.
They had a lot to do with it under the previous Prigozhin. He did a lot there. And France had a lot of interest in that northern sub-Sahara area, and they've really been driven out because they've been wanting money from the mines there to go to France. And Russia said, don't worry about that. Just keep it for yourselves. We'll give you some guns. Everything will be all right. So the French are more or less pushed out. And Russia's in control.
I've heard it said that 3.5. Sorry.
It's all right, I'm going back again.
You might as well stay over.
I think we'll stay here.
Get you the chair. But, I've heard 3.5 mentioned. 3.5 years mentioned as the time that Israel may be subdued. When the gate of the north comes down. 3.5 years is a terrible long time, isn't it?
Yes, that's unfortunately generally pushed by the Pentecostals with an idea that there'll be an Antichrist in control for 3.5 years. Wipe that from your memory. It's just not appropriate.
No, you'd want it to be quicker than that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise...
I think it'll be a very short space of time where there is peace and safety. They'll say peace and safety, the walls are broken down, You know, everything's solved. You know, the Palestinians are looked after by the Arabs, their brothers. We can progress here now. We feel safe and secure. We've got all our protections in place. Nobody immediately looks like they're going to attack us.
Will it be the literal walls, do you think, too?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, they've got the big walls there now separating. Why will they need those anymore? They won't need them. The West Bank, I think, is part of the borders or the coasts of Palestine. They'll be gone too. And they'll be looking and saying, wow, that looks pretty good over there in Saudi Arabia. They're building new cities, they're building new industry, they've got lots of money, and then they're telling us, come over. Well, more are saying, come over, or, you know, or we'll round you up and bring you over. And that will be the future.
My question was, do you think it'll be the literal walls that will fall?
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. The boundary walls that they put up to keep the Palestinians out, they'll come down. No bars nor gates. And I think...
No, there's hardly anything there now, is there?
No, well, there's nothing much there now, and no future unless somebody pours billions in. But who's going to do that? The Arabs won't want to do that. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, said in the ear of Anthony Blinken, he said, I don't really care too much about the Palestinians, but a lot of my younger people do, so we've got to try and do something for them. He's not really interested in that. He's interested in progress for his own country. Now, if he can use those people to help progress his country by way of labour and keep everybody happy, that's what he'll do. He's got the money to do it. So
Once a few tunnels, he'll be right.
Yeah.
Let's also consider that Palestinians are not a nation. They're just Arabs from around the area that came there because they could get better paying jobs in Israel.
Mainly Jordanians, weren't they? Yeah. And I suppose from elsewhere as well.
They weren't a nation at all, really.
No. Well, you know, the Arabs in Israel are very well treated, and the ones that, majority of them, they appreciate that.
Yeah.
There's 2 million of them, I think, close to it anyway, who live in Israel as Israeli citizens, and they can vote and have members in Parliament, all sorts of things.
Yeah,
There's a few radicals amongst them, but you know. So some of them will probably stay settled there, but the ones who, the militant ones will be gone. They'll be totally dealt with. And the other people will look at it and say, well, where do we go now? You know, where's the future for us? Our brothers are Arabs, we're Muslims, we'll go with them. You know?
And the other aspect of money-wise, for Russia's interest, not only the trade through the canal there, Suez Canal, but also the Israeli oil gas lines coming down into Egypt and liquefying gas there. And when you consider that Europe was a significant part of Russia's income that she's lost now, well, she'll never get that back. And then you've got more rockets being fired into Syria now, and Assad was the reason why they went in there, to make Assad on their side, get him propped up again. But if he gets wiped out in the current situation, well, then Vladimir can change his mind about needing to have an enemy in Syria.
Well, northern Syria will be allied with Russia. They are mainly Shiite Muslims allied with Persia, whereas further south you get more of the Sunni, the more moderate, Hamas is Sunni too, but more likely to make alliances with Israel. They're all the southern ones. So you're right that Russia will come further south. As far as Lebanon is concerned, north of Tyre and Sidon will probably remain the country of Lebanon. But up to that area there will become part of Israel, or certainly under Israel's control, shall I say, because the Resolution 1701 of the United Nations says that Hezbollah had to be north of the Litani River, but there's another river just further up, just past Tyre and Sidon, which is the Awali River, which also is a good geographical line, and Israel has said to people living south of that, move north from there. So that would fulfil the prophecy. Tyre and Sidon, all that area of south of the Awali River, under Israel's influence, no walls, bars or gates. Those people, and the people from Gaza, and the people from the West Bank who don't want to stay in the area, off to Arabia.
But then after Armageddon, it's from Euphrates down to the Nile, isn't it?
Oh, totally, absolutely.
And from the
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes,
east of the Jordan, across the Mediterranean.
right across. Yeah, that's right. So there's more land to be given to Israel later on. Yeah, later on.
Have you any thoughts on, Isaiah 17, it talks about the destruction of Damascus,
Mm.
and it says Damascus will lose its glory just as Israel has lost its glory.
Mm. Mm.
That can, well, there's a bit of concern there, Israel losing its glory. It's like it seems to me like they've done something to Damascus, or they've done something to lose their glory, or they've lost their manpower.
Well, look, the terrible situation is that in Armageddon, if it all applies to Armageddon, which it most likely seems as though it will,
Yeah.
that as Russia comes down, Damascus goes, if not before Damascus goes. And whilst Russia in the first instance comes down the coastal area through Israel and doesn't do much to Israel on the way through, and Israel sort of steps back and says, you want to go to Egypt? Go by all means. When they come back, 2/3 of the Jews will be cut off.
I see.
That's what it's got to be talking about, isn't it? Terrible situation. And they will be on their absolute knee bones, when the Lord intervenes.